Hey, everybody. Welcome to our second in a series of what we like to call privacy and data security chats here at Shook, Hardy, and Bacon. If you saw the last one, welcome back. If this is your first one, it's just kind of an informal get-together among us privacy lawyers at Shook to kind of chat about, updates in the law, different areas of law. And this week, we're talking about international law. And also on the chat, we have Al Cyclade, chair of our practice. Wonderful Al. If you don't know him, you should.
That's what I go by. I'm going to change my name to that.
Wonderful Al.
Wonderful Al. And also on the line, the extraordinary Kate Payne in our Tampa office, who is our international privacy law guru. Kate, introduce yourself. Let the world know who you are.
Do people still have the roof anymore? I don't know.
You do. You do.
In Tampa, we do.
So, so
Kate is also a huge Harry Potter fan, as we were learning right before the call started.
Yeah, I busted out.
Right? I mean, kind of. Go ahead.
I busted out the blue Ford Anglia that they drive into the Whomping Willow, and Al understood immediately what it was. So I told him I could keep working with him. So.
Yeah, but then you took it one step further and introduced your second piece of paraphernalia.
He said he flew it into the tree, and I said, "Oh, do you mean the Whomping Willow?" So yeah, I've got that too. I've been spending some of my downtime in quarantine putting together Harry Potter Legos. Actually, not a lot of people know this about me, but I do have a pretty valuable Harry Potter Lego collection. I have a lot of the vintage Legos that they stopped selling back in the day, and it's kind of my retirement fund. And I figure if they have no value anymore, I'll just build the world's biggest Harry Potter Lego room. So either way, it's a win-win.
But the craziest part of it all is that Kate is in our Tampa office right next to Universal Studios and the wizarding world of Harry Potter. And yet, go ahead, complete the sentence, Kate.
Since in the 4 years since I moved to Florida, I still haven't gone to Disney or Universal. I know, I'm ashamed. I don't want to deal with the traffic on I-4, I guess. I've just been waiting for the right time. So I'm either waiting for my fiance to finish the books or my niece and nephew to come visit. So just waiting for that right moment.
All right.
I told Al he could get it for me as a wedding present.
We're all playing with our paraphernalia on our desks. All right, sorry, Coleman. We're totally distracting you from
That's all right. Hey,
substantive discussion.
I put on a collared shirt for this for the first time in weeks, so I think we should probably actually get to some substantive content.
There we go.
Agreed.
The first thing we wanted to lead off with is to get Kate's reaction to the potential delay of the LGPD down in Brazil. So, Kate, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, so actually I'm in quarantine. I've also been learning Portuguese, so I'm gonna try this for the first time. This is the Lei Geral de Proteção de Dados. I think that was all right. But so there's kind of been some interesting developments, even as recently as yesterday. There seems to be sort of a power struggle, if you want to call it that, is who can succeed in their plan at postponing the law. Basically, there was a bill introduced a couple weeks ago that was voted on by the Brazilian Senate and was approved by them that would delay implementation of the law, which is set to take place this August in a couple months until January of 2021, so about 6 months. And then enforcement would take place, wouldn't start for another 6 months. So basically a year from when it was supposed to start. So that had passed in the Senate. It's kind of unclear what the House of Representatives in Brazil is waiting for to vote it. If they approved it, it would then go to the president's desk. In the interim, the public prosecutor weighed in and said, while we agree with postponing enforcement until August 2021, Brazil needs to show that it's really taking data privacy seriously, especially, amidst this public health crisis, and let's keep the implementation date the same. We're going to give additional time for compliance, but there's no good reason to postpone implementation. And then just yesterday, the Brazilian president, is kind of unclear as to why, introduced his own provisional emergency measure that would delay everything until May of 2021. So kind of between those two dates. That's in effect for 60 days, which accomplishes really nothing. It can be postponed. My understanding is, it can be pushed back another 60 days, but after that, there has to be a vote or it dies. So it's kind of unclear why he went that way instead of just waiting for the House to sign the other bill. So either way, I think I'd say 99.9% clear that this law is getting delayed. Whether that's going to be, until August 2021, May 2021, January 2021, we're not sure, but I don't think we'll start seeing any fines or real implementation for at least another year and a half. Now, personally, based on, really how in-depth I've gone in the law and understanding what the law accomplishes and all the gaps that it still has, I think delay is a really, really good idea. There's still been the National Data Protection Body has been created, but there's been nothing really, it's been established, but not created, I think is the better way to put it. Nobody's been appointed to it. They've not issued any guidance or guidelines, which is crucial because unlike the GDPR, the Brazilian law actually has provisions that say to be elaborated upon by the, I think it's the ANPD is the acronym for their data protection body, but an important one being the time frame in which you have to report a data breach. I think the text of the law says something like within a reasonable time frame to then be set by the ANPD. So we're waiting on that, and I think it's really tough. I think implementation can proceed. I think it's a good idea to get, your pieces in place, but I definitely think it's a good idea to delay enforcement. So that's really the update there, and I think within the next couple of weeks, my guess is that we'll know a little bit more on what that's going to be. Now, for people listening and saying, oh, that's great, I have a lot more time to postpone compliance efforts with the LGBT. I think now is actually a great time to get compliance, to get in compliance with the law, especially if there's kind of some downtime, if you will, in the workflow, especially if you're already GDP compliant. Then it really just usually involves taking the documents you've got and reframing them, retooling them for LGBT compliance. And sometimes that can be as simple as just changing a little bit of the language, and other times that might be creating a different kind of document, if you will. For example, the LGPD has fairly different laws when it comes to subject access requests and the time frame. So that might be a good area where you want something new. So I think now is a great time to either start or continue a compliance program. And that way, it doesn't matter what the deadline is, if they change it to, you're ready. And again, this is GDPR-esque because it has that extraterritorial feature, if you will. So it's going to apply to companies anywhere that are really trying to do their business in Brazil, but also, really has that bite of, it changes every day, the valuation, but fines of, around 10 to 12 million dollars, or 2% of the annual turnover. So.
Mm-hmm. And speaking of laws that we want businesses to think about complying with, Bermuda, which I believe passed their Personal Information Protection Act back in 2016, but has basically just been sitting on the books largely because there was no data protection officer for Bermuda until recently, and we have special connections to that person. Al, we'll talk about how you know Alex White.
Well, I'm not going to kind of oversell our connections. Alex, I had an opportunity to work with Alex. As some of you probably know, Alex used to be the data privacy officer for the state of South Carolina. And I will just say, Alex is one of the nicest guys you could hope to meet. Just like kind of salt of the earth, really good, nice guy, good sense of humor. He's been heavily involved in the IAPP over the years, and in the Sedona Conference's working group on privacy and data security. And so I've gotten to work with him in those capacities in the past. And I just know this is a fantastic decision because he's got such a wonderful temperament, really smart guy, very knowledgeable in the area of privacy. And I think it's, publicly known right now that he's sort of on this listening tour where he's, kind of trying to figure out what is the temperature there for privacy. One of the things that I've learned is that, Bermuda is just such a hotspot for insurance companies. And it's one of the most expensive places in the world to live, which I didn't know that either. And so he's there in Bermuda with his family now. And, who knows, maybe if he's listening or watching, Alex, you're always welcome on this chat.
Give us a call. But we'd love to have you on.
Yeah. He's a great guy. So that'll be interesting to watch as that develops over time and to see how their new privacy law gets enforced. So yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah, and if I can just jump in, it's actually, it's a law that has some bite, and I think that probably, given Bermuda's reputation as being a tax safe haven, I think, people might not be thinking about the protection of data down there, and applies to processing done in Bermuda. So the language, I don't think it really has that extraterritorial effect, but a lot of people are doing business down there, and you can be fined as a business up to $250,000 per incident, and it also contemplates jail time in the law, actually. So, I've read that Bermuda, I don't know if this is still in Commissioner White's plan, but I read that the plan always was to seek an adequacy decision from the EU Commission to allow, data transfers to proceed from the EU into Bermuda. So that just goes to show that it is a pretty comprehensive law. It does have a lot of protections. And one great thing about it is it's actually written in English. So if you're interested in learning more about the law, it's a very accessible law. I found it pretty easy to follow. And so, we've seen the Privacy Commissioner's website is up and running. They actually have released a couple guidelines in the past month or so on, privacy issues during the COVID-19 crisis, as well as remote working. So we're really seeing some activities start to pick up. And while I don't think the law is fully enforced yet, it's only a matter of time. So this is another area where companies that are doing business there are really going to want to make sure that, they're complying with, just like every law's, the unique kind of intricacies of that law.
Mm-hmm. And speaking of COVID-19, which we don't want to talk about it, but, it's kind of the 1,200-pound gorilla / elephant in the room. What's going on with GDPR and COVID-19, and how's the EU handling that as far as data protection?
Yeah, so I think the EDPB, right? So they issued some guidance a few weeks ago. It was kind of preliminary. That's now been really turned into guidelines. And they've done it in two areas. So one is more of a general document, kind of with guidelines about the processing of health data during the COVID-19 crisis. I read through it, and there was nothing I found very surprising. I think the goal of the document was not to say, oh, hey, we're going to make exceptions now because we have this crazy situation that no one ever predicted. To the contrary, it's actually the GDPR contemplates something like this in its provisions, and there's no reason that you shouldn't be able to effectively deal with the public health crisis while also showing the respect for data, for people's data that the GDPR requires. I would say the biggest takeaway is that it establishes that for transferring data internationally, I think that's a thing a lot of people are thinking about as you're doing studies for trials and vaccines and things like that, as governments are hoping to share data, is it establishes that, yes, the derogation of an important public interest or public health interest, important reasons of public interest derogation, that does apply here. So I think in derogation land, when you're talking about international transfers of data, there's always that feeling as a privacy lawyer of, oh, this is a little bit of a risk. If you have a SEC, a standard contractual clauses document, or binding corporate rules, or an adequacy decision, you've crossed your T's and dotted your I's. But with a derogation, you have to hope that your basis for invoking that derogation will hold water if you're ever challenged on it, and remembering that it's only to be used occasionally and really when necessary. So they said in this situation, that is an adequate grounds. However, if you're thinking about more longer term research projects, then you're going to need to adopt one of the other legal mechanisms for transfer, which I don't think is a huge deal because, the standard contractual clause language is available to everybody and fairly, routine to put together. So I'd say that was, one of the bigger takeaways. They reiterated really that this data it's sensitive data. It needs to be adequately protected. It must at least be pseudonymized. Whatever you're collecting, just collect all the information. We're still in the whole, necessary and proportionate land of GDPR. And so really, it's just meant to reiterate that, this is a crisis, but work within the GDPR's framework of tools to kind of get the data that you need.
And it seems sort of consistent with what we're seeing here in the States too with HIPAA. Now OCR is sort of making some exceptions to the privacy rule, or making clear that there can be sharing of PHI by business associates or covered entities under certain circumstances, and given what's going on. And of course, it's raising this whole controversy as we're seeing articles being written by privacy advocates saying, hey, look, just because there's an emergency going on doesn't mean privacy goes out the window. Of course, you can take both sides. I see both sides of that argument, right? So it's interesting to hear this about GDPR because, of course, I think it's really sort of considered the standard bearer for privacy laws around the world, and so to hear that it's being interpreted that way, where you've got enforcement authorities there who are so pro-consumer is I think a development to continue watching in this space as we move forward.
Yeah, and Coleman's tracker this morning actually mentioned a new bill that was just proposed here in the U.S. about protecting this kind of data and making sure that, really, when I was reading the terms of the bill, it kind of mimicked some of these concepts from the GDPR. I think what people are most nervous about, the sense that I get from reading and listening, is that people are most nervous about how long the data is going to be kept. It's a sense of, I'm happy to share my data if it's going to get us through this, but now are you opening the door for, once they have all the data, for it to be misused? And so I think that is a key scene. And a key concern among, privacy advocates. And what I find interesting too is, so it's not just at the commission level or the EDPB level, you're also looking at the individual countries in the EU that have been issuing their own guidance. And I think just today, the Spanish Data Protection Authority they've been writing a lot. They have like a blog that they write a lot on, and they issued a piece on temperature checking. Right now you have Spain, one of the countries that's just been hit so hard by COVID. And you'd say, if anyone might be desiring to kind of bend the rules here and make sure that this is under control, maybe Spain. And, really said, you have to keep in mind temperature data, things like that. This is considered health data. This is a special category of data. You have to comply. And now if you go to the special categories of data provision in the GDPR, you know that you can't collect unless kind of conditional collection provision, but there are plenty of ground, there are at least 2 or 3 grounds here that would suffice to collect this kind of data. But you just got to make sure, that's why documentation is so important even now, because I really think once this is all settled down a bit, you're going to see people saying, what kind of data do you have on me? I think we're going to see a huge uptick in subject access requests investigations. And so this is why documentation remains, extremely important right now. And just real quickly, the other guidance. Sorry, go ahead, Al.
No. Go finish. I can jump in afterwards. The other guidance.
Yeah, I was just going to say the other guidelines we got from the EDPB was with respect to another big news story right now are these contact tracing apps, right? That seek to figure out who you've been by, and if that person is infected, or if you are infected, then the people you've been around can be informed. And, the EDPB has just said this absolutely has to be voluntary. This is not something that can be done involuntarily. If you're going to do it, the data needs to be anonymized. And, this is not about tracking people's movements. We're not there, and hopefully we'll never be there in society. This is about proximity data. And so really from, I'm not the technology guru, but from what I've been reading, the technology behind it is basically assigning people, a anonymized number. And then when they can figure out kind of if your number has pinged near other people's numbers and then let you know. But again, it's only as useful as the number of people who sign up. And as people continue to be weary about, data being collected and more importantly, kept on them, I'm not really sure how effective these are going to be. So.
Yeah, the only thing I was going to sort of chime in and say is back on the point about thermometers. I know a lot of our clients are increasingly thinking about using thermometers in the workplace to help employees determine whether they have a fever or whatever that may be. But some of these thermometers now have facial recognition features that are built into them, which you got to be careful about, right? Because potentially then are you now collecting biometric information, right? And depending on where you're doing that and where you're using it, are there any biometric privacy laws that apply that require disclosure and consent, whether that's Illinois, Washington, Texas, or wherever it may be. And of course in the EU as well, that's the biometric data is a whole other sort of category within that sensitive personal data. So it's just one more feature to think about as I think companies move back into this transition of moving back to work and adopting certain technology that might trigger some of these other privacy laws as well.
Yeah, I think kind of the overall theme that kind of comes to me based on our conversation here is that, we're in the middle of a huge crisis globally. But that doesn't mean that we can stop thinking about privacy and security, because there are laws out there that still apply right now. There are laws that are coming online or will be enforced in the near future. And the actions that we're taking today are going to lead to consequences down the road. So we can't get lazy about things right now and let things slip, because in the future it's going to come back around when this craziness passes. Consumers, regulatory authorities, they're going to be looking back at what happened to see if there's anything that needs to be checked up on. So I don't know, anybody have any other last thoughts before we're kind of over the 20-minute mark? We don't want to get too long. It's a Friday. It's May Day. Weekend calls. So last thoughts, anybody?
It's good to see you guys. That's all.
Yeah, you too. I know. Looking forward to being able to see you guys again in person. I'm looking forward to football season because my Florida Gators are going to dominate. That's right. Exactly.
Al, on one of these chats, you'll have to show everybody the gift that we got you last year.
Yeah.
Oh, I know. Once I get back in the office, it's hanging up there in the office. You guys got me a 3D version of the swamp, Ben Hill Griffith Stadium. So it's pretty amazing. It's up there. Thank you all. All right. Well, good catching up with everyone. Yeah.
Thanks so much. Everybody out there watching, thank you for tuning in, and we'll talk to you next time.
Bye, guys.